Good morning. Today is the 6th day of Adar, and it is also the 27th of February. And we're continuing with understanding how Amalek is represented in the psyche and what role he plays. So far we saw these 5 or 6 stages in which contemplation of the infinite turns into action. And we saw that there's a general division between the intellect and the emotions, between the mind and the heart. And now he says, we already talked about this, that for the energy to be drawn down from the mind, from the brain into the heart, that happens through what we call the sphere of da'at. Specifically, this sphere of da'at, ubchinat da'at tachton, this is called the Da'at Tachton or Da'at Mitpashet. It has all kinds of names. And it means that my concentration allows my intellect to affect my emotions. My concentration, my taking things seriously, and my feeling that they have an impact on me. What do you say? Because that is always a type of concentration. By the way, when the Rebbe Rashab was searching for a cure for his numbness in his left arm, which he suffered from early childhood, he went all over Europe looking for different solutions. At that time, it was common to do electrostimulation. So he went to different places, and he ended up in Vienna also. And there he saw another one of the neurologists that were around at the time. His name was Ziggy Freud. And Herr Freud started, he had his own shita, his own method, which was what they called the talking cure. So he talked to the Rebbe. And from the description of what happened that we have from his son, from the Friediger Rebbe, one of the things that they dwelt upon was that Freud asked him to describe what is Chasidus. And so he said, Chasidus is the attempt to connect, is to make what the mind understands impact the heart. So what the mind understands, the intellect should impact the emotions. And Freud right away said, but that's impossible. There are 2 continents. There's no connection between them. And so the Rebbe Rashab said something like this. He said, on the contrary, it's true that there are 2 continents, but just as now we can connect 2 continents by way of telegraph, which is what they had back then, talking about 1903, the winter of 1903. So there was a telegraph already. He said in the same way the telegraph can connect two continents, so in who we are, there's a connection. At least a connection can be made between the 2. So this is the connection. It's called the lower consciousness, lower dat. So what we're setting up is a relay. It's a telegraph system, whereby whatever you contemplate becomes felt, becomes something emotional in your character. ולא כמו שחושב איזה דבר שאינו נוגע לעצמותו. And it won't be like some random thought that a person has that doesn't touch upon his essence. It's not relevant to his essence. It's just some random thought. So a person thinks some random thought, it doesn't excite his emotions. It doesn't excite his being. ולא כמו שחושב איזה דבר שאינו נוגע לעצמותו, כי אם שההתבוננות יגיע לבבו ממש, ייוולד מזה אהבה ויראה. But rather we want there to be a solid connection, and we want the heart to awaken with love and fear as a result of this contemplation. כמו הדרך משל מידות האהבה ויראה גשמיות, מה שאוהב דבר הטוב מתירא מהדבר המזיק לו. It says, for example, we can take any number of things that people find to be harmful or causing some kind of harm to them. So if it's going to harm you, what does a person do? והוא עניין הרגשות עצמות שמרגיש נפשו. בלשון אשכנז, בלשון יידיש, der Herr von sich sehr stark. ומצד אהבת עצמו, הוא רוצה לומר, אהבת הנפש, הרי הוא חפץ מאוד בהתפשטות החיות, הנפש שהתפשט בגוף. So he says, when something really touches a person, for instance, he hears that there's gold in California. Yeah. And he's in 1850 or 1860, whenever the gold rush was. And he decides, I'm selling everything I have, I'm getting on a wagon, I'm getting on a train, whatever, I'm going to make it all the way to California and I'm going to become rich. It doesn't mean that, it doesn't matter that the whole gold rush was enough to make two people rich. Everybody came.
Why, was that gold there?
It wasn't enough. It was a little bit. It was good for 2 or 3 people. They became very rich, but that's it. So what does he feel? He feels, I understood it. I understood that there's gold there, and now it immediately affects my actions, because it's nogea. It's something that's relevant to me.
Affects.
It's what?
Affects.
It affects me. So he says, there you see what it means that when you understand something, you read about the gold rush in the papers, and then you go and you travel all the way across the United States. It takes you 2 weeks, or however long it took back then, or 3 weeks. And there's Indians, and there's this and that along the way, and there's starvation, and all kinds of problems. But you go and you do it. Why? Because it extended from the mind down into the body. And that's what it means that he feels himself, he feels his very self in this thought. Meaning right away he feels, I need to go. Right? It's translated now into action. ומצד אהבת עצמו, רוצה לומר, אהבת הנפש, הרי הוא חפץ מאוד בהתפשטות החיות בנפש בהתפשט בגוף. And because he feels that this is something that is worthwhile, and it affects him, so it enters into his body, and he wants it to extend, because he feels that there's a lot of life in this. Whenever he talks now about the gold in California, he's all lit up. He feels so alive. So that's the type of connection that we're looking for between the mind and the heart.
It's imbued. Imbued? Is
that the
word?
word?
No.
That's not what I was looking for.
Hmm?
That was not what I was looking for. With a varam eziklo, we take the opposite, something that's going to cause him harm. There's something that will cause him harm. And so he hates it with all manners of hate, and will do everything to prevent it from spreading in him. מה שאין כן, מי שאינו מרגיש את עצמו כל כך, אף שמבין בשכלו שטוב לו הדבר, מכל מקום אינו מתפעל כל כך באהבה וחיבה יתרה. So still, even if a person understands something is not good, but they can't awaken their heart to hate it, to stay away from it, so they will eventually, like chocolate, okay? He will eventually take after it. מה שאין כן, כן? מכל מקום אינו מתפעל כל כך באהבה וחיבה יתרה. Still, it's true that he's less overwhelmed by these feelings of needing this. ובאמת במי שמרגיש את עצמו בחוזק, הנה הכרה בדבר שהוא טוב, הוא גם כן באופן אחר לגמרי. דהיינו, היבנות שמבין בשכלו, איך שהדבר טוב נתאמת אצלו בהכרה והרגישה איך שהוא טוב, ונתעורר אצלו אהבה להדבר הוא בחוזק. זה הבא תליה. And the opposite is also true. That when he's convinced that this is a good thing to pursue, then he brings his whole body into it. ומקור לכל זה הוא הרגשות עצמותו על ידי התקשרות בחוזק לחשוב ולהרהר בזה, כנ"ל. And the source of all of this, all of these feelings, come from the essence. And the essence here is above the crown. כמו כן יובן במשל בעבודה, שעניין הדעת הוא ההתקשרות בהתבוננות בחוזק דעתו, עד שיהיה אצלו בבחינת הכרה והרגשה, איך שאור אינסוף הוא חיי החיים ברוך הוא, כמו שכתוב, ולאהבה את השם אלוקיך, כי הוא חייך שעיקר חיות המחיה את העולם, ובחינת אור האלוקים מתפשט בעולם להחיותו. So here too, the person wants to cling strongly to God, because he understands that everything that's in the God is the product of this type of thinking, that I need to express myself, I need to show myself in the world. So this is called the extending dat. It's called the extending force of consciousness. ועיקר המשכת האור האלוקי הוא על ידי קיום מצוות עשה, וכדורת המצוות עשה הם המשכות מלמעלה למטה. And when it comes to that, what is the best way to bring the divine presence down? Because that's exactly what happened here. The divine presence began to spread, and the person looks at it and says, this is what I was waiting for, this is what I was looking for. So then he looks at it, and he says, the divine presence, the Or Ein Sof, the infinite, is here. The divine presence is here, and I need to connect to it. I don't need to invent it. It's here. And that's what he wants. He wants to connect to it, and as a result of his connection, it should spread, it should extend out over all of reality. And that's called ויחפוץ מאוד בהתפשטות החירות ובחינת אור האלוקי שהתפשט בעולם בגילוי. ועיקר המשכת האור האלוקי הוא על ידי קיום מצוות עשה. And the main vehicle for being able to extend the divine light from the mind down into the heart, or here we're talking about from the Torah into reality, is mitzvos, is God's commandments. How do we know this? Because it says, ובלעדו אין להם שום קיום ומציאות כלל, אפילו רגע אחת, ולזאת ירצה ויחפוץ מאוד בהתפשטות החיות ובחינת האור האלוקי שיתפשט בעולם בגילוי, ועיקר המשכת האור האלוקי הוא על ידי קיום המצוות עשה, כידועות המצוות עשה וממשיכות מלמעלה למטה, ויראה ויתפחד מהדבר המזיק להגילוי אור, והם המצוות לא תעשה. He says we have two types of mitzvot, prohibitive and prescriptive. And the ones that are prescriptive are the extension of godliness from above to below. And then to have fear that what will happen, I have fear, I have trepidation of anything that will stop the revelation. That, he says, that is the negative commandments, the prohibitive. וכל זה הוא על ידי הדעת שהוא ההתקשרות בקשר אמיץ וחזק שנתאמצת לו בבחינת ההכרה והרגשה ונולד על ידי זה בבחינת אהבה ויראה שהם מקור רמ"ח מצוות עשה ושעשה לא תעשה. So all this happens through what? Through this da'at, through this, what we just said. The da'at that's able to connect from between the mind, goes through the throat and reaches the heart. And that da'at is what allows a person to become serious about something. If you don't have that, you don't have the concentration, you don't have the commitment, then what you have is just, okay, the Torah has some commandments, some of them prescriptive, some of them prohibitive. Okay, so it's no big deal. It doesn't touch me. Like I do them because that's my practice. My practice is to perform these mitzvot. But in truth, it's like nothing in a certain sense. Because why? Because what? Because the only reason you're pursuing it is because you were told to do so. But you're not connecting to it. You're not coming and saying, this is the vehicle through which I will receive everything that I want to receive. So all this is what happens in a normal state. But now we've finally now come to Amalek. What does Amalek do differently? But the klipa of Amalek, הוא קליפה נגד מוח הדת, שהוא ההפך מבחינת הדת לקדושה שהוא מחבר מבחינת המוחין במידות. It says that Amalek is the opposite of this consciousness, the opposite of this knowledge. This knowledge, this consciousness, this sphere of dat, all it does is it tries to connect me to godliness everywhere, in everything. But what does he want to do? He wants to do exactly the opposite. He wants me to not see godliness in anything. He wants the mind to be separate from the heart. V'zeu Amalek, Amalek. That's why he's called Amalek, which is the same letters as a nation that cuts off, Malak. כמו שכתוב, הוא מלק את ראשו, ממעל עורפו, שמפריש הראש מן הגוף, כמו כן קליפות עמלק קוראת ומפריד את הראש, שהוא מבחינת המוחין מן המידות. So it says, Amalek, what do? They dismember you. They take apart the head from the torso. And so there's no connection between the mind and the heart. And physically, mamish physically, they do this. We'll see in a moment that he explains it differently, but
The word you want to do is enthralled.
enthralled, maybe. כמו כן, קליפות עמלק כורת ומפריד את הראש שהוא בחינת המוחים מן המידות. But they also do something more. They completely sever the head off the body. They make it completely separate. Two different stories altogether. You have the head, and he has his story in the world. Who's the head? Some big tzaddik or someone like that who already knows how to do this, who's figured it out. And then you have everyone else. And what he does is he dismembers this. So no person who's creating something that is good, it's not perfect, but it's good. So they don't go to someone who's already done perfectly. They won't go. Why? Because it's involved with pride. There's a ton of pride in it. And this da'at, there are many types of da'at. I think we said this last time. There's many types of da'at. I think 7 altogether. And this specific one, it's good with Amalek. Imagine they already... What did I say? In this particular da'at, it is able to make the entire body stand. Meaning, it's like what makes the entire body stand? The spinal column. The spinal column. No, what gives the body its shape is the spinal column. So we say that this dot, this type of dot that we're talking about, which is like a vav, which is like drawing things down, is akin to the spinal column. And Amalek is the opposite, because what does he do? He cuts the spinal column. That's what he does to you. He takes you apart there, in your spinal column. And Amalek is the opposite. He stands opposite to the back of your head. And what's the back of the head? It's where the spinal column connects to the brain. So the first C1, right? The very first vertebra.
As in Malika.
And that's called Melika. That's called severing the head from the animal's body. And from the lower mind, the lower brain, the part that connects to the spinal column, out of that comes what we call not the spinal column, but the spinal cord. So we have a spinal column, and inside there is a cord. So maybe we'll get into this later, but all these are images, because whenever we talk about the light of the infinite ray of light that came down into the place of the halal, the place of the empty vacuum, the empty void. Whenever we say there's a new ray of infinite light that came down, we say that the ray is kav v'chut. It's both a column, like a kav, like a line, and it's also a chut, it's also a thread. Meaning, as it comes down, it on the one hand it extends forcefully down, bringing more and more light into the lower worlds where you don't see God, where godliness is hidden. But it also, at the same time, is also hollow on the inside, and is bringing down a continuous thread, which is always connected to the infinite. It's very important that the column itself has two parts to it. The outside part, that's like in the human being, that would be like the bones of the spinal column. But inside the bones, there's an infinity. And what's this infinity? It's the literal connection from the bottom part of the brain to the spinal cord, which now extends into the entire body. Right. Like we said, he always will bring at least a mashal from science, from what they knew at the time, and he'll also bring a psychological mashal. Again, what's he trying to understand? He's trying to understand the Amalek. Okay? So he translates Amalek into two things. On the one hand, what does this mean anatomically? And on the other hand, what does this mean psychologically? And those are his two mashalim. Those are his two parables. So that's what he does. And if the regular dat, what it does, the regular consciousness, what it does is it makes the spinal column stand. Because it gives the person his ability to walk upright. Where do we see that? We say a bracha every day. What do we say? What's the bracha that we say? First of all, there's the bracha that I can stand up, right? Zokef kfufim. That's one. They made me stand upright. Then we say, Anoten laef koach. Then you say, he gives the strength. Then we say, Hamechin mitzadei gaver, who prepares everywhere that I'll walk today. And then we say, Shasali kol tzarki. We say that he prepared all my needs for me. And there we mean that he prepared shoes. Literally, that's what we mean. Because shoes are what kol tzarki is. So this dat that's coming down is upholding the entire person. And we have 4 different blessings on this every morning. On this dat that comes down and makes us stand up. וממנו נמשך החוט השדרה שהוא עיקר קיום הגוף. הכנ"ל גוף הם בחינת המצוות רמ"ח פיגודים, רמ"ח איברים דמק, ושעשה, לא תעשה שעשה גידים. ועיקר קיומם הוא בחינת הדת, שעל זה נולדים מידות אהבה ויראה אמיתיות. אהבה ממקור רמ"ח, וכנ"ל כל זה באריכות. All this we did. And Amalek, he's the opposite of all this. He's umalak. He like chops off your head from the back. He severs everything. He severs the connection between the mind and the heart. And so what Freud described was exactly that. He described a state, which is probably what his state was in, because he thought it was normal, in which the mind and the heart are not connected. Okay, so let's end here. And so we have a pretty good picture of what Amalek is now.
Yeah.
Continue tomorrow, Bezrat Hashem.